Abstraction has been a core element of video game design for as long as they've been a thing, really. Video games themselves are abstractions, and there's no way to perfectly mimic our own reality. So we're often left with attempts at highly stylized representations or earnest attempts at approximation, and in some cases, some truly unsettling recreations that occupy a scary, not quite right space. There's so much to discuss when it comes to abstractions use in gaming, and how the term has changed in recent times, how developers have utilized these changes to affect player agency, player experience, and expression, and how some emergent trends have changed the way we view and discuss abstract titles in general, and instances of abstraction in particular. But today I'd like to narrow that focus down on a common and specific criticism of turn-based combat that has always kind of irked me: that it isn't realistic. While this is not the only mark against turn-based systems that I take issue with, it is a nearly ubiquitous sentiment among that certain group of detractors. The group I'm alluding to is the same group that claims that turn-based systems serve their purpose as a workaround for early technical limitations and should be defunct by now, as advancements in the industry have led to quote-unquote better and more involved representations of combat in the medium. I'll eventually address that more thoroughly, but supposing that a creation born of necessity holds no long-term value once something more advanced comes along is fallacious. And technological advancements in all sorts of media have shown that old formats are stubborn, and the same can easily be said of turn-based combat. Now, also, to clarify, I hold no issues with the simple "I don't care for it, I prefer other styles of combat in my video games." That's quite fair, and I'm not the type to stand on a hill slapping down all careful and balanced assessments. After all, it's easy to see how, even as a fan of it, the slow-paced, deliberate, and often quite punishing aspects of the system might not engage people in the same way it does with me, and that's fine. But the realism argument is an odd thorn to tackle, and this critique of turn-based systems seems short-sighted given that faithful real-life depiction of combat was never the aim, even if it is for other titles. The way in which I've always tended to rationalize, when pushed to do so that is, how the gameplay in turn-based games meshes with the fiction of the game, for example, Phoenix Downs, one blow from a sword in a cutscene felling an opponent while simultaneously withstanding 30 blows in an actual battle, is that I'm viewing a representation, an abstraction of what is actually occurring in that world for the player to process and interact with. There aren't many ways to gracefully reconcile these factors without creating the most punishing and inaccessible fighting system. The battles would boil down to a speed stat or sheer luck, and that's really not immersive, even if it is accurate and faithful to the game world's fiction. But I never genuinely pictured Cloud waiting around patiently in a fixed position to exchange blows with Sephiroth, making sure that each got a turn before the other would go. Again, that's just the way this system elects to demonstrate the action in this world to the player. Maybe it's a reach, but I didn't take that depiction literally. It seemed more like once the battle ended, there was a multitude of actions resolving at once, however convoluted that might sound to some. Again though, my own working around of this isn't really important. What is paramount though is the enjoyment of the expression. Chalking one's dislike of it up to realism while simultaneously lauding the way action RPGs elect to express a game's fiction seems contradictory to me. I'm not suggesting that we can't analyze systems or that only our subjective engagements matter. It's obviously true that turn-based combat is slow-paced and can boil down to repeating normal attacks once a certain threshold has been met, even though plenty of developers have met that common black mark with some inventive and challenging mechanics that render the zone-out and hit-attack method only semi-functional, and sometimes even less than that. It's also true that these titles often lack true skill tests and often opt for in-universe knowledge tests or gear checks, and this is a massive point of contention, especially as the genre in turn-based combat evolved to, yet again, attempt to address some of these common complaints. In fact, I've felt for a long time that JRPG's legs were cut out at the near apogee of the genre, at a point where fans were seeing wildly unique and definitive shifts in turn-based innovations aimed at directly solving, or at least working around, persistent shortcomings and recurring grumblings from players. Having done a reasonable amount of reviews over the last few years, I think it's fair to state that many of the repeated harsh criticisms of turn-based combat were met with clever and inventive workarounds by some creative minds. Even if some core frustrations lingered, games of the PS1 and PS2 eras seemed to take more risk and invent and iterate in ways that gave the players more ways to express, control, and respond to battle conditions rather than the traditional A counters B, which is countered by C method, or the grind until you just slam attack with your forehead routine. I wanted to see this carried out, but that just wasn't destined to be. The realism chants were natural offshoots of changing expectations during the late PS2 era, and honestly, this obsession began even earlier. It just became more vocalized. This was an era that saw large leaps in graphical capabilities, and an inevitable increase in the infatuation with cinematic visuals and storytelling, and almost instantly placed a slower, story-driven genre with static combat and archaic graphics in an odd and disfavored place. A place that, due to plenty of frustrating factors and misperceptions, it would never recover from. While there are plenty of threads in this video I could follow, and I probably will in future videos, I want to drive home my point that the assertion that turn-based combat lost steam because it wasn't realistic seems ridiculously unfounded to me, specifically when the complaint is often followed by wholesale endorsement of action-based systems. These systems themselves hardly mirror or even attempt to simulate realistic combat. Maybe the simple act of moving a character is just more faithful for some. I certainly don't mean to boil this down to a petty squabble between two distinct factions, and I mean no offense, of course. I thoroughly enjoy both kinds of combat. I just felt it necessary to clarify why I often balk at these critiques. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. My Twitter is also located right below the video. This has been Andrew with High Level Reviews, and I appreciate you guys stopping by.